Hello, everyone. My name is Roopa Sunku, and I'm the Chief Evangelist at Touch a Life Foundation. I have the extreme pleasure to introduce to you Raj Asava. And Raj is going to join us on another episode of Career Elevations, an opportunity to hear some successes and some of the tribulations and how Raj has surpassed it to be able to be and determine his career path or his success path, as I would call it, and hope to be able to take some of his prescriptive methods and make it yours and make that your success path as listeners to the show. Super excited to have Raj. Raj, how are you doing? And welcome to the show.
Thank you, Roopa. Good to be here. And hello to all the listeners.
Awesome. So let's start with Raj. I have heard a lot about your passion and your drive with HungerMitao, but what are other things that you have done so far, and how did you land yourself at HungerMitao?
Well, this will take us back to when I was growing up in India. Mm-hmm. So I was born and raised in Hyderabad. Now, my ancestry goes to Rajasthan. My great-grandparents migrated from Rajasthan to Hyderabad, and I was born and raised there. And I was raised in a joint family system, lots of love, and lots of education and lots of leading by example is what I thought my parents and my family members did, which grounded me very well early in my life. And then as I grew in a loving household, my dad made sure that I went to the best schooling system available in Hyderabad, which put some hardship on him, but he would not compromise on that. Now, my dad had 8 kids. I am 4th from the top, but all 8 of us got the best education available at that time. And somehow growing up in India and with the education system that my dad focused on, I knew right away that my path is towards a good education, a good career, and making a good fortune through that. I was a brilliant student at school to the point that my headmaster had me go from 1st grade to 3rd grade, and you won't believe it, from 3rd grade to 6th grade.
Wonderful.
So I was excelling in school and I was doing quite well. The only drawback there was I was the youngest in all my classes. Mm-hmm. So I was always behind when it came to the sports side, because everybody else was better built and older than me. So they always beat me at sports, which bothered me a lot. But life has interesting twists and turns, because while I was doing well and excelling in school, come 10th grade, which was a very important grade in school, I had typhoid. And typhoid back in the 70s was a pretty deadly disease. And fortunately, I was recovering from typhoid, and then I had a relapse. Oh. So long story short, I was on bed rest for an entire year. And that really messed up my entire education system, because in India, there was, at least back in the 70s, there was no semester system. So if you missed a year of school, you were really left behind. Mm-hmm. So I was kind of confused. I was a little bit lost. I wasn't sure what to do next. And fortunately, my elder sister, who was living in America at that time, she and my dad came up with a plan for maybe give me a fresh start by moving to America. So my sister sponsored me, and I came to US in 1974 at a pretty young age. I was in my teens. And I want to emphasize here, the reason I'm giving this story to the listeners is that life is always about second chances.
Yeah.
When one door closes, 2 windows will open up for you. So don't stop. Don't think that, the world is against me, or even things don't work out the way you had planned and hoped for. Don't give up, because those days, I remember back in the days, there used to be and there is still a quote that floats around, which is opportunity only knocks once. Mm-hmm. I don't think that is true. Opportunity is always around you. it's up to you to make the best out of whatever situation you are thrown in. And I'll share with your listeners the key to my career, and I'll share details about my career and the key to the success of my career. I would say in one word, agility.
Wow.
Because as things change, you have to be flexible and agile and adapt to it. I'm not suggesting you should not plan out. You should definitely plan out. But that old saying, man proposes, God disposes, right? So whatever you propose is not necessarily going to come true. Things will change. Now you have to be dynamic and adapt to it. Coming back to my story, so I came to the United States, and my dad was a firm believer that I should stand on my own 2 feet, right? And he said that you should not be dependent on anyone. So he actually sent me to America on a fly now, pay later ticket. So most people who come to America say, I had $8 in my pocket and this thing. And my story is that I actually had a $1,500 debt on me when I landed in America. So the very first thing I had to do was to find the first job. And here I'm a young person, no degree, nothing. The first job I could find was that of a dishwasher at a hospital. Now, growing up in a middle-class family, upper middle-class family in India, I'll be honest with you, we had servants at home and I never washed a single dish my entire life. And here I was, my first job, working at a 100-bed hospital, every day washing over 1,000 dishes. Talk about karma, everything. All the time that I did not do dishes, it caught up with me. But I had to work, take that job because that was the only job I was qualified for at that time. Right. I worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week. In the very first year, I must have taken maybe 4 or 5 days off. So out of 365 days, I worked 360 days because I wanted to pay off the debt as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And once I paid off the debt, I remember what my dad did for me, which was, and me and my siblings, which is focus on education. And that stuck in my mind. And I knew that for me to ever get out of any kind of a situation, any kind of a setback, is to make sure that I follow the path of education and learning. So I immediately went back to school. Around that time, computers were just beginning to take off. And I got myself a degree in computers. And I loved it. I applied myself to it. And it was like a new life for me. And I became very successful in the computer side and the corporate side. And I will kind of fast forward. I had a wonderful corporate career. I worked for some large organizations like General Motors, Chrysler, the company that actually started the IT services industry, which is electronic data systems, which was Ross Perot's company. I worked for them. And one of my highlights in my career is that I proposed to EDS that they should start EDS India. This was in early 90s when the software industry was at a very nascent stage. And my company liked that idea. They moved me and my family to India to start EDS India. This was in 95.
Beautiful. Amazing.
And that was my entrepreneurial experience with the safety net of a large corporation. Mm-hmm. So I came to India on an expat assignment with my family, stayed there for 3 years. 2 years I stayed there. 1 year I was traveling extensively. And we started EDS India. And it was a very, very successful venture. Company loved it. After that, I came back to United States. I came back to headquarters in Dallas. And there during the dot-com days, I was president for a couple of the startup companies. I was also working for an organization that most of our listeners must be familiar with back in the days called Satyam Computers. So I actually worked for them as a senior vice president. But I left them in 2017 before that implosion happened within that company. I left them and I joined Perot Systems, which was rejoining my mentor, Ross Perot. Mm-hmm. And I became the chief strategy officer at Perot Systems. And in 2010, we sold Perot Systems to Dell Computers. Mm. I'm going to pause here for a second, and I'm going to again address the listeners and say, now look at this: a young person coming to America on a fly now, pay later ticket, starting as a dishwasher, working hard, right? Applying themselves to something that they are passionate about, something that they love, which in my case was technology and computer science. I eventually retired from the corporate world as the chief strategy officer from the company of the founder of the IT services industry.
Absolutely.
Right? It has been a terrific ride. It had its own shares of ups and downs, but you never give up, and you keep applying yourself, keep looking for opportunities, and you find successes in all the interesting places. So I left the corporate world in 2010. I'm going to pause here, Roopa, if you have any questions on the.
Yeah, I actually want to take the listeners through a couple of scenarios and what you've highlighted to me. And I am first and foremost in awe with the agility, which you said is most important for us to be able to traverse the challenges of life and be able to grow to that success quotient that we kind of aim for and we goal for. So the first question to you is, how did you know what to gravitate towards now with your education, for example? You knew you were walking into a country where computers was just beginning to take form and shape. How did you decide that that is the area that you will be able to excel in? And obviously it took a lot of grit to go into an engineering sort of a degree with computer science as your major. So how do you make those decisions of what is right and how do you get onto that?
Sure. I think, and I believe that this is not a gut feeling. This is actually intelligence. And I believe every one of us, applies their intelligence first. And then eventually a decision-making process is when there is a gut instinct that you have to rely upon. What I observed, Roopa, in the early 70s when I started going to school, the American schooling system was actually very good because I could change my major if I did not like it, number one. So when I first saw the computers and, I just felt, looking at the power of the computational power, I just kind of felt that every industry, regardless of, country, regardless whether they are for profit or for non-profit, whether they are scientific or a banking or a business venture, they will all require this kind of computational power. To me, it was almost like obvious. And I really felt lucky to be at the early stages of this computing revolution starting out. So once I was convinced that this is the direction where this paradigm shift is taking place, I just applied myself to it.
Fantastic.
You are correct about one thing. People of my age in the 70s and early 80s, I'll be very candid with you. I mean, they were out partying, right? And I was out there doing two jobs and going to school because I just wanted to make something of myself. Also, coming from a large family, it was also my goal to not only, make something of myself, but to support my family back in India. In fact, I sponsored and I brought all my family members to America. So all that was my driving force to kind of stay focused on a mission that is going to help me make something of myself, make something of my family, and not get distracted by the short-term, immediate sensory fulfillments.
Love that terminology. Absolutely. Absolutely. So kind of taking you to the next phases, you've talked about such large corporate footprint that you have covered in your career overall. So how did you start off with GE being your first company and then moving on to Chrysler? How did you kind of enter the so-called computational revolution that you talk about?
That's a good one. So let me kind of clarify that I may have misspoken. So when I mentioned to you, I started as a dishwasher. Then subsequently, I started working at Chrysler.
Okay.
I started working at Chrysler on the factory floor, what they call in America the blue collar, right? So I was actually helping in building the cars. It was a manual labor job, but I was going to school part-time. So as soon as I got my degree, I went to the personnel department of Chrysler and I said, hey, look at me, look at my belt. I mean, I have a degree here. So please give me a chance to go work in the computing department of Chrysler. And it was a catch-22 back then. It's the chicken and the egg. Everybody would say, hey, we'll hire you if you have experience. And of course, I did not have an experience. So I would tell them, unless you give me a break, how would I get an experience? But another thing for the benefit of the listeners here, I shared earlier about agility. Other thing is that being persistent. I mean, I used to go to the personnel department, which is today they call the HR department, but I used to go to the personnel department of Chrysler literally every day. As soon as my manual labor shift was over, my next stop would be there just to see, hey, is there any job opening? Is there anything? I said, give me any job in the computer department. Even if it is sweeping the floor there, I will take that because that is what my future is. They loved my passion. They saw that this guy is serious, he's persistent, he's consistent, and they put in a good word for me in the computer department. And long story short, one of the person there invited me, interviewed me, and they, hired me. But they hired me to do mostly manual job of running around, dropping off printouts and things like that. But, sometimes there are opportunity in crisis. Now, here is something that happened. Chrysler was suffering as an organization at that time, and they were almost ready to go bankrupt. Those are the days when they brought in Lee Iacocca as the CEO.
Right.
So they laid off a lot of people. So when they laid off a lot of people, well, they didn't lay me off because I was the junior most person. Laying me off, I was not making that much money to start out with. So interesting thing happened. As a junior person, I got a lot more workload put on me, right? Because they had more work, they had laid off people. And that allowed me to actually now do the work that senior folks were doing. And that gave me an opportunity to prove to them my talent. And when they saw that, hey, this kid, he can do this kind of work, right? I mean, then my career started taking off. And then other people noticed, and I really was accelerating in my entire career. I left Chrysler. I joined a consulting firm, and through them, I worked at many organizations. General Motors, I was working for them on a consulting gig. They liked my work so much that they actually bought out my contract from the consulting firm. They said, we don't care how much it costs. We want Raj Asava to become our team member. And so they paid them off. They bought out my contract, which was unheard of back then. And I joined GM. And again, within GM, they saw my talent. They kept throwing, toughest assignments at me, and they saw results. My career took off. And my joining EDS happened because GM bought EDS in 82, I believe. And then I was transferred to EDS because of EDS is a computing organization. So that's how I ended up in EDS. And then within EDS, every year, I was just the career was just rocketing away.
Okay. Talk about being in the right place at the right time. And obviously the grit and the hard work and the perseverance that you talk about opened up those windows of opportunity. I can so relate to your journey in this phase of your life because, one, I worked for TWA Airlines as well myself, and Lee Iacocca was one of those personalities that seemed to have ruled the corporate world in those days in the 90s this time around. Yeah. So again, it doesn't matter what your education is. It definitely creates that foundation. But if your head is in the right place and the direction you want to carve for yourself is clear to you, then anything can happen. Yes, it's not a simple journey, but it would definitely be something that you can groom your brain to think of. And secondly, take and find those opportunities to prove yourself successful. So that was just wonderful stories or narratives that you've shared with us, Raj. The next phase of your life, and I'm assuming that EDS India was again that scope of trying to say, how can I differentiate myself from the other people and create that footprint that can be beneficial to the corporate world and definitely satisfying my needs of growing and sustaining a career? Is there anything else that you'd like to kind of add to the narrative that you've shared?
So, Rupa, I'm going to give a secret to your listeners. If you want to have a breakthrough career in an organization, the key is very simple. Work and operate higher than the level at which you were hired at. Because if you are doing a good job at what you are hired to do, guess what? You will stay right there.
Absolutely.
You have to excel. You have to operate higher than that. One of the biggest drawback I see in why people's career do not take off is that they're not open and sharing. I learned early in my life that if I want to go to the next level, I have to find a replacement for me at this level. So I almost always, whenever I took on a new position, I almost always readily identified who can replace me and start grooming that person, and readily shared knowledge, shortcuts, and encouraged them and gave them the limelight, so that when the new opportunity opens up, I have somebody who can back me up. Organizations and leaders cannot tell me, oh, Raj, we cannot let you go because you are too essential here. Well, guess what? I have somebody who can take my role so I can move on to the next level. Right?
Absolutely.
So I think that is so key. And that attitude, it becomes, in fact, I believe, is a healthy way of working, because there is no competition anymore. Now you are actually helping that other person's career also while helping your own career.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, succession planning, as you mentioned, has been not something that people take on to readily because they feel they're going to be disposed from that situation or that position. But like you rightly highlighted, the fact that you create a succession plan for yourself allows you a lot of independence to go one level higher, to be able to strategize, to be able to have that engagement. And there's really no top of the iceberg or tip of the iceberg that you will ever reach in any position, because there is so much that you can change and keep growing. And the pinnacle is yet to be reached in any form or shape. So that was a beautiful message for you. So now kind of moving from your corporate world to the nonprofit work.
May I add one more thing? One more thing I'll add in here. Another thing that I always feel is that early on, I had many mentors in the corporate world. And that's something that I encourage everybody. If you think that you can do it all by yourself, you are mistaken. There are people who are wiser, who have been there longer, who are smarter, and latch on to them. Absorb and soak in their lessons learned, the mistakes they made, so you do not need to make the same mistakes again. So I had some very, very good mentors. And so one of the mentors, asked me that, if you really want to excel in the corporate world, think of yourself like a CEO of the organization. Right? I mean, don't be a order taker all the time. Yes, you have to take on tasks because that's part of the job. But don't limit yourself to just that. Take interest in the organization. I am appalled. Several times I have asked my colleagues, hey, have you looked at our, the new VP has come in, or there's a new COO has come in, or our stock is trading at this. Several people have no interest. They say, that's not part of my job. That's not part of my department. I said, no, but you need to take interest because that's your organization, right? So what I learned from that is that keep your CEO hat on all the time. And it is because of that, I came up with this EDS India strategy. It was not a organization's request. I just saw some dynamics. There were three things, Rupa, that I saw in early 90s. EDS had billions with B, billions of lines of code that they had to fix for the Y2K problem. Secondly, EDS had many of their customers who were now beginning to go to India when India opened up in the early 90s. Thirdly, India itself was opening up as a market. Right. So when I saw those three dynamics, and I saw there was zero presence of EDS in India. So at that time, I was working in the strategy team. So I created my own strategy, and I called it EDS India. And I floated that across the organization. I must have, back in those days, they did not have email. So I had made hard copy of that strategy document. And every meeting that I used to go to, as soon as the meeting was over, I would go stand by the door and find the senior most person who was attending that meeting and give them a copy of it, hoping that they would take interest in it. By being persistent, one of those leaders saw that report, they liked it. They brought me into their organization and they moved me to India and they said, Raj, make EDS India happen.
They talk about, you've phrased it beautifully, and they talk about saying you are your own CEO for your company. You need to aspire, believe, and kind of regurgitate your message internally and then externalize that message to make sure that you can get to where you want to be. So that was a beautiful bit of analysis and feedback from you. Okay, so we will now move over to your nonprofit after this illustrious career in corporate America. How did you get yourself into this? And I can see the same drive, the persistence, the consistency in HungerMitao as well. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So in 2010, the company itself got sold to Dell in 2009. So that was Poro Systems. I was the chief strategy officer for Poro Systems. We sold it to Dell for $4 billion in 2009. And imagine, this was the time when there was a lot of the subprime financial crisis, the markets were down, etc. But even during that time, we got a significant premium for our organization. Must be the strategy officer, right, Rupa?
At least, if not the strategy officer, the charisma of the strategy officer definitely paid off.
Well, we did well. It was a good transaction for us. I had to stay on for 1 year to help in the transition as part of the executive team. But after 1 year, when I was ready to kind of make a decision what I want to do next. My wife had retired from the corporate world a year before that. She was with EDS, which was bought out by HP, and she was tired of the corporate world, so she left in 2009. In 2010, my wife and I, we sat down and we said, let's kind of look at the priorities in our life, right? At that time, we have two boys. They were both grown, and they were both off our payroll. so they were both working young adults at that time. So my wife and I said, we can keep working and keep adding more zeros to our bank account, but the time account is going down. And we said, what are the three most important things in our lives? So in 2010, the three things to be identified, we wanted to spend more time with our aging parents and family members here as well as in India. Second, we wanted to travel and see this beautiful world that God has put us on. Because it's a gorgeous world. I mean, we are not just, as human beings, we're not intended to just do 9 to 5 and just be so career-oriented that, yes, we got a title and we got a good bank account, but we haven't really gone out and experienced the beauty of this world. So we wanted to travel a lot more. And third thing, my wife, Aradhana, and I were influenced by one discourse we heard by a guru from India. It was purely by accident. We were in Los Angeles and we walked into that discourse. And this guru in his discourse said 3 words that were life-changing for us. He said, human life is best lived in 3 stages. and they are overlapping stages. And those are learning, earning, and returning.
Wow. Wow.
As simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife and I, we both looked at each other and said, you know what? We are in the returning stage of our life. And returning is not just monetarily. We have to give back our net worth. We have to give our network, because, I have thousands of contacts on LinkedIn. I have so many relationships that I built in my corporate career. I mean, I'm not taking any of that with me. So if anybody wants to get connected, I'm happy to introduce them and get them connected.
Yeah.
Also, all the life's lessons learned, mistakes that I made, right? How do I transfer that knowledge to the next generation? So I mentor young entrepreneurs. I mentor senior executives so that I can transfer that knowledge over to the next generation. So with these three things as our priorities in our life, which is spending time with family, traveling and seeing the world, and then giving back. We left the corporate world, safety of the corporate world. And from 2010 onward, we've been just spending 2 to 3 months a year in India and Southeast Asia, traveling different parts. And then we have been involved in a variety of charities. Majority of them back then were focused in India, education-focused charities and food and hunger-related charities in India. So we supported them. We raised funds for them, millions of dollars here and sent over there. But, interesting thing happened. I was having lunch with our local mayor in 2015. I had lunch with him. During the lunch, the mayor asked me to sponsor and support his backpack program. Mm-hmm. I thought it was some kind of a marketing gimmick. Mm-hmm. US, we have lots of marketing, gigs. So he corrected me. He said, no, Raj, I'm talking about backpack filled with enough food for a school-going child to last for the weekend.
Wow.
I was shocked. I said, where? In the rough neighborhood, downtown areas? He said, no, Raj, I'm talking about schools where your children went, where my children are going. Now, Roopa, we live in one of the best zip code in the country. Mm-hmm. And when he told us that 1 in 4 school-going children did not know where the next meal is coming from, here in America, in one of the best zip codes, I was shocked. I mean, it was hard to believe.
Yeah.
And I came home, told that to my wife, and both of us found it very difficult to believe. So one of the things that Ross Perot taught us was, if you ever want to find the truth, bring all the liars into one room. So we invited the mayor to our house for dinner. We invited the food bank. In America, they have a food banking system. So we invited the leaders of the food bank to our home. And I was on the board of an Indian physicians organization. So I invited the board. I said, if hunger is an issue, it'll translate into health. So you need to listen to that. So when that evening was a monumental, change evening for us, because when we saw the stats, when we saw the numbers, and at the end of the presentation, Colleen, who was presenting, she actually pulled out the backpack and passed it around. And we looked inside the backpack. We saw small boxes of juice and milk and sunflower seeds and granola bar. There was not a dry eye in that room that day. It just felt, oh my God, I can't believe it. I'm surrounded by this and I'm oblivious of that. So my wife and I at that time decided that this karma bhumi of ours, our adopted land, which has given us so much, we were so oblivious of issues that it had right around us. Yeah. So we need to do something about it. So we started doing our due diligence to validate, is that issue for real? And secondly, what is the best way to help? So we started volunteering at the food bank. We started participating in different committees and boards. And once we validated it, my wife and I, we wrote a check for $100,000 to the food bank, but we did not want to be one and done.
Yeah.
So we told the CEO of the food bank that, it occurred to us that it took me 40 plus years to recognize there was hunger issue here.
Yes.
And I don't see too many more Indian Americans in the volunteer line or at our our social gatherings, I don't hear people talking about the hunger issue. So we offered to the CEO that we'll give 3 years of our life to raise awareness of the hunger issue in the Indian American community.
Amazing.
She said, nobody has ever done anything like this. We always wondered how to crack the communities. But if a community steps up, and that's nothing like it.
Yeah.
So we basically huddled and we put together a strategy. And we said, okay, the psyche of the Indian community, we are logical people, we are smart people, we are competitive people. So we said, you know what, we do not want to create yet another organization. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we said, we will throw our support behind the food bank. And we created a movement, and we named the movement HungerMitao. Mm-hmm. And HungerMitao, as hunger is hunger, Mitao means wipe out in Hindi. So that became our rally cry, our slogan, our tagline is give where you live. We are telling people, if you are donating things to back home in India, please continue to do so. We are not telling you to divert it, but we are asking them to also be aware of the issues here and be seen as a community that is giving back.
Absolutely.
So we had a twofold vision, Roopa, that we set up very early on. First and foremost, we call ourselves the modern generation. Right? How can we be modern generation if half the population in the world is dying of hunger? Right? We cannot call ourselves a modern generation. And secondly, we wanted the Indian American community in America, because we have to put a scope around somewhere. So we want the Indian American community to be known not only as smart, logical CEOs of large organizations like Google and Microsoft and Adobe, etc., and our kids are known as the spelling bee champions, etc. Right? But we also wanted people to know that we are people of big heart. Annadanam is part of our DNA. We give food to the dog and to the stray dog and the cow before we eat. That's the culture we come from. Yeah. So we wanted people here to see that. And with that being our vision, we basically, Aradhna and I got to work and we started conducting awareness sessions. And it was, whether it is 2 people at Starbucks or 20,000 people at the football stadium, we went and spoke about the hunger stats in America. That time it was 50 million people of a population of just over 300 million who did not know where the next meal is coming from. We were further alarmed, Roopa, when we found out that 40% of Americans are just $400 away from a crisis. That means if somebody needs $400 because they had an accident or a health issue, or they need a plumber, some water pipe broke, they would not know where to go. They cannot come up with $400. That would be crisis for them. So when we learned that, we said, this Karma Bhumi, we got to do things to help and get them back on their feet. Yeah. So we went ahead and launched this movement in 2017. And knowing my background in strategy, knowing our target audience, Indian community, I said, we are goal-oriented, Bollywood, Tollywood, cricket players, right? So we put a 1 million meal challenge. We committed to the CEO of the food bank that the Indian American community will enable 1 million meal. I just didn't give them the deadline because I had no idea how long it would take. But because of the power of the awareness session, Roopa, in 7 months, we crossed the first 1 million meals.
Congratulations. That is to be applauded.
And then the word took off. And, and there's another thing, momentum, right? Once you do something good and you're on the right track, people join in. Ironically, one thing for your listeners, whenever you're trying to attract an audience or a group, the psyche of the group is nobody wants to be first and nobody wants to be left behind.
Left behind.
So we just have to figure out a way to kind of push them along up to a point where suddenly a few of them take off and they become first. And then everybody is ready to catch up saying, hey, we want to be first also. Right? And then the momentum really takes off. So what took us 7 months for the first 1 million, 4 months later, we crossed the second 1 million. The word got out. other food banks across the country, they reached out to us saying, hey, can you launch HungerMitao with us? So we had a filter, which is wherever there is a high degree of Indian American community concentration, we would go and work with food banks there. And so we started and we launched it in Houston with a very large Indian population.
Right.
There. We launched it in Atlanta. We launched it in New York City. We recently launched it in Detroit. So long story short, just recently, we celebrated 5 years of HungerMitao, the movement.
Right.
And in the 5 years, Roopa, the Indian American community, and I keep saying, people say, Raj and Anna, that's a great job you did. I said, no, it's not Raj and Anna. It's the Indian American community that came together and declared a fight against hunger. And in 5 years, we enabled 15 million meals in North Texas, where we live.
Wow.
And 50 million meals across America.
Beautiful. Very, very amazing. And again, it's the power of that messaging and awareness, like you said.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Raj, for just some beautiful, powerful, and passionate messages from you. And I think the 3 words that stick with me is learn, earn, and return. I thought that was just the most beautiful message in any part of your life, right from your corporate journey of learning the ranks, learning the work, being able to make that trust quotient with your management team, earning that respect, and then being able to return with some ideas that you could kind of forward play for the corporation. And then secondly, the mentoring is your other mechanic of being able to return to that society of growing individuals in the corporate space. Then looking at the nonprofit, I like to call it more than a nonprofit. Like you said, it's a cry, or it's a rally. It's about that awareness. So again, learning of the awareness around you in your ecosystem. And most people, like you said, we live here in the US. We often think that we need to take all our efforts and money and pay it forward in India because it's a third world country. But we fail to realize how much poverty, how much distress, how much anxious moments are spent right here, not only by the other communities, but our own Indian community is struggling tremendously in certain areas. So again, learning of the facts and then paying those dues by earning some time, volunteering and creating those rallies. And then thirdly, returning to the society by making that difference. And I love the piece that you talked about. I just don't want to make it a one-time deal of donating a large amount, but make that a systemic thing so that people could be aware of. I normally ask my speakers to talk about what inspires them. And I think you've illustrated that with so many of your examples. And I think I would say that much of my listeners will definitely call you an inspiration for the different aspects of your life and that you've shared with us so openly and so meticulously, giving us an opportunity to draw our straw man and be able to follow some of these things from us. But before I close, is there any one message if you want to leave behind with the listeners be, and what would that be?
Sure. So, Roopa, at the beginning of this session, or maybe even before the recording started, I mentioned to you I will be speaking from my heart. So there is no prepared remarks. I just shared everything as I recalled. I'm not sure whether I was crisp and clear or not, but
you are absolutely.
Thank you. On the learning, earning, and returning, I actually wrote an article. And if your listeners are interested in that article, I will post it and I'll keep it on HungerMitao.org. So if they visit HungerMitao.org and they just do a search on the Life Mantra article, it will be there for them to download, because I want as many people to benefit from it as possible. So
awesome.
that's and I am always accessible. My email address is also very easy, raj.asava@hungermitao.org. Drop me a line. I will do my best to respond back. I am in my returning stage, and whatever way I can help the next generation, it will be my honor, delight, and a sense of pride.
Amazing. Let's just go. HungerMitao and carry on the rally.
Love it.
Fantastic.
Love it.
Thank you, everyone, for listening in to our show. Yet another fun-filled, exciting-filled, passion-filled encounter, I would say, with Raj, the amazing energy that you brought to the table. Come back and listen to us for many such shows and many more excitement-filled sessions with us. And let's go ahead and learn, earn, and return. Thank you, everyone.